A little girl carrying a newborn baby she found in the trash went to a millionaire's house and said, "Please let me be your maid." Surprisingly, the millionaire. Janet walked through the maze of alleyways behind Chicago's bustling streets, the morning air a biting whisper against her skin. Frost clung to the edges of dumpsters, glinting faintly in the weak dawn light. Janet tugged her oversized hoodie tighter around her thin frame. It wasn't warmth. Nothing about the hand-me-down sweatshirt could fight the city's winter, but it was something to clutch, a threadbare shield against a world that seemed too vast and unyielding for a 12-year-old to endure. Her sneakers, soles half-worn and patched with duct tape, crunched softly over the frozen debris scattered across the pavement. Janet's gaze darted between the shadows, searching. Broken crates, discarded food containers, and scraps of newspapers piled in darkened corners held the promise of something, anything, useful. The camp wasn't far, just beyond the graffiti-splattered overpass that divided the city's wealthy district from the forgotten one. There, amid the patchwork tents of tarps and fraying blankets, Janet had carved out a small corner of stability. Stability. She smirked at the thought. A collection of cardboard walls and an old tarp borrowed from a construction site could hardly be called stable. But it was home. Her stomach rumbled, a low, gnawing ache she'd grown accustomed to ignoring. "Later," she muttered to herself. "Find food later." Her voice was soft, like she was afraid the city might overhear her. Talking aloud was a habit she'd picked up since the streets became her constant companion. It made the silence less suffocating. A sudden, sharp sound broke through the ambient hum of the city waking up. A cry, thin, reedy, and unmistakably human. Janet froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. The sound came again, weaker this time. She turned her head, eyes narrowing toward the source. A trash bin leaned crookedly against a brick wall, its lid partially ajar. For a moment, she hesitated. People left all sorts of things in dumpsters, none of them good. Memories of bitter encounters and sharp rebukes flashed in her mind. "Not my problem," she whispered, her voice lacking conviction. The cry came again. Janet stepped closer, her heart pounding. Her hands trembled as she pushed the lid further open. Inside, amid crumpled takeout boxes and torn bags, was a sight that made her stomach lurch. A baby. Small, impossibly fragile, wrapped in a ragged piece of fabric that had done little to fend off the cold. Her first instinct was to back away, to run. What could she possibly do? She was barely surviving herself. But the baby's cry reached her again, a raw, desperate sound that seemed to pierce through the layers of her own fears. "Hey," Janet murmured, her voice cracking as she leaned closer. "Hey, it's okay, I think." The baby's tiny face, pale and red with cold, scrunched up as it let out another weak wail. Janet swallowed hard, her mind racing. With careful, clumsy hands, she lifted the baby from the dumpster. Its body felt impossibly light, the fabric damp and stiff with frost. Janet held it close, her own thin body radiating what little warmth she had. The enormity of the moment pressed down on her, and she squeezed her eyes shut for a second, trying to gather herself. "What do I do with you?" she whispered. The baby didn't answer, of course. It only nestled closer to her chest, its cries softening into hiccups. Janet exhaled shakily and looked around, as if the city might offer her a solution. No one was there. No one ever was. Back at the camp, Janet settled the baby onto the worn piece of foam she used as a mattress, layering every scrap of fabric she could find over its tiny frame. "Ryan," she murmured, testing the name. "That's what I'll call you. Ryan." Saying it out loud made it feel real, like naming him had tethered them together somehow. The hours passed in a blur of makeshift caretaking. Janet scavenged for water in a nearby fountain, warmed it as best she could over a makeshift fire, and dampened an old t-shirt to clean Ryan's tiny face. She tore strips from a cleaner piece of cloth to fashion a diaper, her hands moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. As night fell, Janet sat cross-legged beside Ryan, watching the baby sleep. His breaths were shallow, his chest rising and falling with delicate effort. She tightened the blanket around him, her brow furrowed in worry. "It's not much," she murmured. "But it's home." For the first time in as long as she could remember, Janet didn't feel alone. But as she stared at the patchwork ceiling of her shelter, the weight of her decisions settled heavily on her chest. How could she protect him? How could she provide for someone else when she barely managed to keep herself alive? Ryan stirred, a tiny hand reaching out from the blanket. Janet gently placed her finger in his grasp, feeling the soft, almost imperceptible squeeze. A flicker of determination sparked in her chest. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We have to." The wind howled through the cracks of the makeshift shelter, rattling the fraying tarp above Janet's head. Inside, the chill gnawed at her bones. She wrapped herself tighter in the thin blanket, her gaze fixed on the tiny figure lying motionless on a worn piece of foam. Ryan's breaths were shallow, his small chest rising and falling with uneven rhythm. His face, once red from the cold, was pale now, almost translucent under the dim flicker of a candle she had managed to scavenge. "Come on, Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Her fingers brushed his cheek, the skin icy to the touch. He stirred faintly, letting out a weak, broken whimper that sent a jolt of panic through her. Janet bit her lip, holding back the urge to cry. Crying wouldn't fix anything. She leaned closer, cradling him against her thin frame, willing her body's meager warmth to transfer to his. Every breath he took seemed labored, every sound a reminder of how fragile he was. Janet had never felt so helpless, so useless. Her stomach growled, but the hunger was easy to ignore now. What gnawed at her was something sharper, a fear she couldn't shake. She couldn't remember the last time Ryan had cried properly, the loud, defiant wails he'd made when she first found him. Now, even his tears seemed to have abandoned him. The muffled hum of voices drifted through the air, carried on the wind. Janet stiffened, her ears straining to catch the words. The others in the camp rarely spoke to her directly, but sometimes their conversations floated her way, snippets of information she could latch onto like a lifeline. "Reed's foundation," one voice muttered. It was gruff, the kind of tone that came from years of hard living. "He's been throwing money around since his kid died. Makes him feel better, I guess." "Yeah," another chimed in, a woman's voice this time, raspy and skeptical. "Guilt will do that to a person, but who cares why? Heard he's paying for food and medicine over at St. Vincent's. Bet he's just trying to buy his way out of feeling bad," the first man replied, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "Rich people always do." Janet's fingers tightened around Ryan's small frame as the words sank in. Benjamin Reed. She didn't know who he was, but the name carried weight, like it belonged to someone important, someone with power, someone who could help. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of the conversation. If this Reed guy had the means to give away food and medicine, maybe, just maybe, he could help Ryan. But the idea was terrifying. People like him didn't help people like her. They lived in mansions with gates and security guards, far removed from the grit and desperation of her world. Janet glanced down at Ryan. His tiny hand twitched against her chest, his body limp with exhaustion. She couldn't keep doing this alone. She had nothing left to give him. No food, no warmth, no medicine. If she stayed here, she'd watch him slip away, day by day, until there was nothing left but regret. The thought made her stomach churn. She had to try. "I can't lose you," she murmured, more to herself than to Ryan. Her voice was steadier than she felt, a desperate resolve bleeding into her words. "I won't." She stood slowly, her legs stiff from hours of sitting in the cold. Wrapping Ryan tightly in the blanket, She tucked him close to her chest and stepped outside. The wind hit her immediately, sharp and unforgiving, but she didn't falter. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit streets beyond the camp, her mind already working out a plan. St. Vincent's. She knew where it was, a few blocks from the park where she used to sleep before the camp. If Reed's people were present, this was her best opportunity. Her heart pounded as she started walking, each step heavier than the last. The world outside the camp felt even colder, even harsher. But she kept going. The city stretched out before her, a labyrinth of indifference. Cars roared past without slowing, their headlights cutting through the darkness like fleeting promises. Janet clutched Ryan closer, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Hold on, okay? Just hold on." Her breath fogged in the air as she trudged forward, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She didn't know what she would say if she found this Benjamin Reed. She didn't know if he would even listen, but the alternative was unthinkable. In the distance, the faint outline of St. Vincent's came into view, its modest sign illuminated by a flickering streetlight. Janet's steps quickened, fear blending with a sliver of hope she dared not yet cling to. She didn't know what was waiting for her there, but she was prepared to take any risk for Ryan. As she crossed the threshold of the street leading to the shelter, she tightened her grip on the frail bundle in her arms and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." The words were a prayer, as much as they were a promise. A prayer she desperately needed someone to hear. The doors of St. Vincent's loomed large, worn by time and weather but still welcoming. Janet hesitated, her heart thumping against her chest. The faint hum of activity inside offered a fleeting sense of hope. She glanced down at Ryan, nestled tightly in her arms, his small face peeking out from the layers of fabric. His breathing was soft but strained, each exhale rattling slightly in his tiny chest. Taking a steadying breath, Janet pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth swept over her, causing her body to momentarily relax. The room was modest, a handful of plastic chairs, a folding table stacked with pamphlets, and a desk where a woman in scrubs was speaking to a man holding a clipboard. Janet shuffled forward, careful not to draw attention to herself, until the woman at the desk glanced up. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone professional but kind. Her eyes flicked to Ryan and softened. "Are you looking for the free clinic?" Janet hesitated, her voice catching in her throat. I heard about Mr. Reed. Benjamin Reed. I need to see him." The woman frowned slightly, tilting her head. "Mr. Reed isn't here. He left about an hour ago." Janet's chest tightened. "Do you know where he went? Please, it's important." The woman gave her a searching look, then sighed. "He's likely at his home. But that's not exactly public information, sweetheart." "I'll find him," Janet said quickly, clutching Ryan closer. "Thank you." Before the woman could respond, Janet turned and hurried out into the biting cold. The sharp air burned her lungs, but she didn't stop. Benjamin Reed had left the shelter, seemingly slipping away from her grasp. She swallowed her frustration and focused on her next step, finding his home. The sun dipped below the skyline, the city darkening into its evening rhythm. Janet's legs ached, her breaths coming in shallow gasps as she trudged through neighborhoods that grew increasingly unfamiliar. The streets were cleaner here, lined with pristine sidewalks and towering fences. She slowed her pace, scanning the buildings for anything that matched the description she had overheard at the shelter, a large estate with iron gates. It wasn't long before she spotted it. The mansion stood apart, grand and imposing. Wrought iron gates stretched high, and beyond them, the house itself was a masterpiece of architecture, cold, elegant, and utterly unapproachable. Janet hesitated at the edge of the property, the enormity of her plan settling heavily in her chest. Her gaze fell to Ryan, his tiny face pale but peaceful. The sight bolstered her resolve. She approached the gate, her hands trembling as she reached for the buzzer. The intercom crackled to life after a moment, startling her. "Yes?" a voice asked, clipped and impersonal. I need to see Mr. Reed," Janet stammered, leaning closer to the speaker. "It's about my baby. Please." There was a pause. Then the voice returned, firmer. "Mr. Reed is unavailable. You'll need to come back another time." "No, wait!" Janet pressed the button again, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, I have nowhere else to go. He's my only hope." The intercom went silent. Janet stood frozen, her heart sinking. She stepped back and leaned against the gate, her legs threatening to give out. The cold began to creep deeper into her bones, but she didn't move. Hours passed, the mansion's lights flickering on one by one as the sky grew darker. Just as her resolve began to waver, headlights appeared down the driveway. Janet straightened, her breath fogging in the air as the car rolled to a stop inside the gates. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out, his shoulders heavy with weariness. Benjamin Reed. He looked different from how Janet had imagined. Older maybe, with sharp features softened by exhaustion. His tailored coat hung loosely, as though it was more an afterthought than a necessity. He turned toward the gate and froze when he saw her. "What's this?" he said, his voice low but commanding. Janet stepped forward, clutching Ryan protectively. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice quivering. "Please, I need your help. My baby, he's sick. I can't do this alone." Benjamin's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he took in her ragged appearance. "Who sent you?" he asked, suspicion lacing his tone. "No one," Janet said quickly. "I heard about you at St. Vincent's. They said you help people." For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze flicking between her and Ryan. Janet's heart pounded in the silence, her arms tightening around the baby. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He'll die if I don't get help." Something in her tone, or perhaps in the way she held Ryan, seemed to shift Benjamin's demeanor. His shoulders dropped slightly, the guarded look in his eyes replaced by something softer. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Come in," he said quietly. He nodded toward the driver. "Open the gate." The iron doors creaked open, and Janet stepped through, her legs trembling with relief. Benjamin gestured toward the house, his tone brisk but not unkind. "We'll figure something out. Let's get him inside first." As Janet followed him up the grand steps, the warmth of the mansion's lights spilling over them, she dared to let hope take root for the first time. The heat of the mansion enveloped Janet as she stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. The foyer stretched out before her, polished marble floors gleaming under an ornate chandelier. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something floral, a scent so foreign to her that it almost felt intrusive. She hesitated just past the threshold, clutching Ryan tightly, afraid to take another step. "Stay here," Benjamin said, his voice clipped but not harsh. He waved toward a plush bench along the wall. "I'll have someone bring blankets." Janet nodded, her eyes darting nervously across the vast space. She perched gingerly on the edge of the bench, careful not to let her shoes touch the cushion. Ryan stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper. She adjusted the blanket around him, her movements slow and deliberate, as though afraid the opulent surroundings might shatter if she moved too quickly. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and a woman in a crisp uniform appeared, holding a bundle of folded blankets and a steaming mug. She approached Janet, her expression neutral but curious. "Here," the woman said, placing the items on the bench beside her. "Mr. Reed said you'd need these." Janet muttered a quiet, "Thank you," her fingers fumbling as she unfolded the blanket and wrapped it around Ryan. The warmth seeped into her skin, chasing away the biting cold that had clung to her for so long. She glanced at the mug but didn't reach for it, unsure if it was meant for her. "Drink," Benjamin's voice cut through her hesitation as he returned, shrugging off his coat. "It's for you." Janet looked up, startled. Thank you," she stammered, picking up the mug. The heat of the ceramic against her palms made her realize just how cold her hands had been. She sipped cautiously, the rich warmth of the broth spreading through her chest. Benjamin sat across from her, his sharp eyes studying her and Ryan with an intensity that made her squirm. "What's your plan?" he asked after a moment. His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of someone who expected an answer. "I'll work," Janet blurted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I can clean, cook, anything you need, just please let us stay. He just needs food and warmth, and I'll do whatever it takes." Benjamin leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "You're 12, he said flatly. "You can't possibly believe you're capable of running a household." Janet flinched, but held his stare. "I've been taking care of Ryan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've kept him alive this long. I can do more. I'll prove it." The room fell into a heavy silence. Benjamin's eyes flicked to Ryan, his expression softening for just a moment before he straightened. "You won't be scrubbing floors," he said finally, his tone brooking no argument. "We'll find another way." Janet's days in the mansion started awkwardly, with every step she took through the expansive halls serving as a constant reminder of her unfamiliar surroundings. The kitchen alone seemed larger than the entire camp she had left behind. She kept to the corners, avoiding eye contact with the staff, who moved seamlessly through their routines, their polished shoes clicking against the tiles. Her awkwardness extended to Benjamin, who remained an enigmatic presence. He rarely spoke directly to her, but she often felt his eyes on her, watching as she fed Ryan or paced the room to soothe his cries. Once, as she struggled to mix formula with trembling hands, Benjamin stepped forward. "Not like that," he said, his voice breaking the tension. "You're making it clump." He took the bottle from her, his movements practiced as he measured the powder and mixed it with warm water. "There," he said, handing it back. "Now it won't clog the nipple." "Thank you," Janet murmured, her cheeks flushing. She watched him retreat, the sight of his retreating figure stirring something she couldn't quite place, a mix of gratitude and unease. Benjamin wasn't sure why he lingered. He told himself it was out of concern that the girl was too young to care for an infant properly. But every time he saw her holding Ryan, his mind drifted to Lucas. The memory of his son's laughter, his small hands tugging at Benjamin's tie, was a sharp contrast to the quiet ache that now filled the house. One afternoon, as Janet rocked Ryan in the sitting room, Benjamin paused in the doorway. She was humming softly, a melody that sounded familiar, but unpolished, like it was being pieced together in real time. Ryan had stopped fussing, his tiny body relaxing against her chest. "She's tougher than she looks," Benjamin murmured to himself, his chest tightening. For the first time in years, the walls he had built around himself seemed to waver, cracks forming in places he hadn't expected. The days turned into a rhythm, small, shared moments between Janet and Benjamin that neither fully acknowledged. Janet adjusted slowly, her movements becoming less hesitant as she navigated the mansion's grandeur. And Benjamin, despite himself, found that the presence of the girl and her tiny companion brought a flicker of life back into the house. The sharp sound of heels on marble echoed through the mansion like a warning bell. Janet froze mid-step in the sitting room, Ryan cradled in her arms. She turned toward the foyer, her heart sinking as an unfamiliar voice rose, cutting through the quiet. "Benjamin, what is this?" A woman stormed in, her tailored coat flaring as she moved with the confidence of someone who expected the world to cater to her. Her hair was meticulously styled, her heels clicking with authority. Janet instinctively tightened her hold on Ryan and stepped back into the shadow of the doorway, unsure whether to stay or run. "Kimberly!" Benjamin's voice was measured but tense, a sharp contrast to his ex-wife's agitation. He appeared at the top of the staircase, his expression unreadable as he descended. "What are you doing here?" Kimberly stopped in the middle of the grand foyer, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I should be asking you that," she snapped, her gaze darting around the space before settling on Janet, half hidden in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed as she spoke. "And who exactly is this?" Benjamin's jaw tightened as he reached the bottom step. "She's a child, Kimberly. Don't start." "A child," Kimberly repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. She turned fully to face Janet, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "And the baby? Don't tell me." Her laugh was cold and humorless. "Are you trying to replace Lucas?" Janet's breath hitched. She took a step back, her legs brushing against the edge of the armchair. Ryan whimpered softly, and she instinctively rocked him, her movements stiff with tension. "Enough," Benjamin said, his voice low but firm. "This has nothing to do with Lucas." Kimberly scoffed. "Of course it does. Everything does. You're letting strangers into this house, Benjamin, acting like it will somehow fix—" She stopped herself, her hand gesturing vaguely toward Janet. "Whatever this is." "This is me helping two people who needed it," Benjamin shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Don't turn this into something it's not." "Oh, please," Kimberly sneered. "You're fooling yourself if you think this will make you feel better. Taking in some homeless girl and her baby isn't going to fill the hole Lucas left." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Janet's stomach churned as shame crept into her chest. She felt small, insignificant, like a mistake that had disrupted something sacred. She ducked her head, wishing she could disappear. "That's enough," Benjamin said sharply, stepping closer to Kimberly. "You don't get to come into my house and say things like that. Janet and Ryan are staying, and that's the end of it." Kimberly's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're serious?" She glanced back at Janet, her lip curling. "This is insane, Benjamin. She's a child. You're not equipped for this." "I'm more equipped than you think," he said coldly. "And whether you approve or not doesn't matter. They're staying." Kimberly was about to respond, but she appeared to reconsider. Huffing, she pivoted and strode in the direction of the door. "Fine," she said over her shoulder, "but don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face." The door slammed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the mansion. The silence that followed was suffocating. Benjamin let out a slow breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. He turned to look at Janet, his expression softening when he saw her pale face and trembling hands. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Janet nodded quickly, though her throat felt tight. I'm fine." "You're not a burden," Benjamin said firmly, his eyes meeting hers. No matter what she said. Janet managed a small nod, but her gaze dropped to Ryan, avoiding Benjamin's steady stare. "Thank you," she mumbled. That night, Janet couldn't sleep. Kimberly's words replayed in her mind, each one slicing deeper than the last. She sat by the small cot where Ryan slept, her knees drawn to her chest. "She's right," Janet whispered to herself. "I am a burden." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, shaking her head. "I shouldn't be here." The thought grew louder, more insistent, as the hours dragged on. She glanced at Ryan, his tiny form peaceful and unaware. "You deserve better," she murmured, brushing a hand over his soft hair. "I don't belong here." For the first time since entering the mansion, Janet felt the urge to run. Not because she was scared of the cold or hunger outside, but because she was terrified of what she might ruin by staying. The morning light seeped through the heavy curtains of the mansion, but it did little to warm Janet's restless heart. She sat stiffly on the edge of her cot, watching Ryan as he stirred in his sleep. Her thoughts, however, were miles away, circling around Kimberly's venomous words from the day before. When Benjamin appeared at the doorway, she jumped slightly, hastily straightening the blanket around Ryan. He held 2 steaming mugs, setting one on the small table beside her. "Drink," he said simply. Janet hesitated before taking the mug, the heat of the tea soothing her cold fingers. Benjamin lowered himself into the armchair across the room, his movements deliberate, as if he was carefully choosing how to proceed. "Kimberly didn't mean what she said," he began after a long silence. Janet blinked, staring into her tea. She seemed pretty sure. Benjamin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Kimberly. She's complicated. When Lucas died, she lost herself. Her way of handling things isn't always fair, but that doesn't make her right." Janet's fingers tightened around the mug. "She's right about me, though," she said quietly. "I'm just some kid you don't even know. And Ryan, he's not your responsibility." "You're wrong." Benjamin's tone was calm but firm. "When I opened that gate and let you in, you became my responsibility. Both of you." Janet finally looked up, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "Why?" Benjamin leaned back, his expression softening. "Because someone has to help, and because I've seen enough loss to know that when you have the chance to save something good, you don't walk away. Leave a comment saying, 'Crepe,' if you've heard this far. Not everyone pays attention to every word like you do." Janet swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. I'm not good at this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time. My parents, they died when I was little. I don't even remember how to have a family." Benjamin's gaze lingered on her for a moment, his own pain flickering briefly in his eyes. "Neither do I," he said softly, "but we'll figure it out." The calm didn't last. By mid-afternoon, Kimberly's plan was already in motion. A car pulled up outside the mansion, and two sharply dressed social workers stepped out, their expressions professional but probing. Janet froze when she saw them, instinctively pulling Ryan closer. Benjamin met them at the door, his shoulders squared. "What's this about?" he asked coolly. "Mr. Reed, we've received reports that you're housing two minors under unsuitable conditions," one of the workers said, flipping open a clipboard. Benjamin's jaw tightened. "From whom?" "I'm afraid we can't disclose that," the other worker said smoothly. "We're here to assess the situation." The visit was thorough and invasive, every corner of the mansion scrutinized. Janet stayed silent, her hands trembling as she answered their questions. Each time one of them scribbled on their clipboard, her stomach churned. Kimberly's voice echoed in her mind, taunting her with the inevitability of failure. By the time they left, Benjamin's calm veneer was cracking. Janet caught fragments of his phone call in the study, his voice rising as he confronted Kimberly. "How dare you?" he barked. "They're children, Kimberly. This isn't a game." Janet edged closer to the door, her heart pounding as she listened. "Children?" Kimberly's voice shot back through the phone, sharp and mocking. "You're fooling yourself, Benjamin. They're your project, and you'll regret it when this all falls apart." The conversation ended abruptly, followed by the sound of something heavy thudding onto the desk. Janet bit her lip, her breath shaky. That night, Janet sat in the dark, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of guilt and fear. Kimberly was right. She didn't belong here. Benjamin's life had already been upended because of her, and now the threat of losing Ryan loomed larger than ever. She looked at the sleeping baby, her chest tightening. He deserved stability, safety, things she couldn't give him here. Quietly, she rose and began packing. A small bag, a few essentials. She wrapped Ryan in his warmest blanket, careful not to wake him. Her hands trembled as she slipped out of the room and into the silent halls of the mansion. The weight of her decision pressed down on her with every step. She paused at the front door, glancing back toward the dimly lit staircase. Part of her wanted to stay, to believe in Benjamin's words, but the fear of being taken away, of losing everything, was too great. Janet stepped into the night, the cold biting against her skin. As the mansion disappeared behind her, a single thought repeated in her mind. "I'm doing this for him," she whispered. "He deserves better." The city stretched out before her, dark and unyielding, as she walked into the unknown. The morning Benjamin found Janet and Ryan missing was a devastating blow to his heart. Her cot was empty, the blanket neatly folded, as if she'd planned her departure carefully. The sight hit him harder than he expected. "Where is she?" he barked, startling the housekeeper as he stormed into the kitchen. "No one's seen her since last night, sir," she replied, her voice shaky. Benjamin swore under his breath, grabbing his keys and heading to the garage. The car roared to life, and he sped out onto the streets of Chicago, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He drove through the familiar streets, past the places he imagined a scared girl might go, the shelter at St. Vincent's, the corner store near the park. Each stop yielded nothing but anxious shrugs and vague recollections. "Please," he muttered under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Don't let it be too late." Janet's legs ached as she trudged through the icy streets, clutching Ryan close to her chest. The city seemed bigger and more menacing now that she was alone again. Her breaths came out in ragged puffs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The park offered little solace. She sank onto a bench beneath the weak glow of a street lamp, pulling Ryan's blanket tighter around him. He stirred, his cries weak and pitiful. "I'm sorry," Janet whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I could do this. I thought I could protect you." Her hands shook as she cradled him, tears spilling onto her cheeks. The reality of her decision bore down on her, crushing the fragile hope that had propelled her into the cold night. The beam of headlights, cutting through the darkness, jolted Janet from her despair. She shielded her eyes, her heart racing as a car screeched to a stop nearby. "Janet!" Benjamin's voice echoed through the stillness, filled with a mixture of relief and urgency. He stepped out of the car, his coat flaring as he approached. "Why did you leave?" His voice cracked as he knelt before her, his hands gripping her shoulders gently. "Why didn't you tell me?" Janet couldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't want to be a burden," she whispered, clutching Ryan tighter. "Kimberly was right. You don't need us messing up your life." Benjamin's jaw tightened, his expression raw with emotion. "You're not a burden, Janet. You're family." Her eyes widened, her resolve crumbling under the weight of his words. "You and Ryan belong here," he continued, his voice firm. "No matter what Kimberly says, no matter what anyone says, I'm not letting you go." Janet stared at him, the tears coming faster now. I thought you'd regret keeping us." "Never," Benjamin said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "You're worth it, Janet. Both of you are." He reached for Ryan, his touch careful and deliberate. The baby whimpered softly, settling into the warmth of Benjamin's arms. "Let's go home," Benjamin said, rising and extending a hand to Janet. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, the gesture grounding her as she stood on shaky legs. Back at the mansion, the warmth of the house enveloped them as Benjamin carefully placed Ryan into his cot. Janet hovered nearby, her anxiety still palpable despite their return. Benjamin turned to her, his expression serious. "We'll deal with Kimberly. I promise you that." But Kimberly wasn't done yet. The next morning, another visit from social services loomed. This time, the accusations were harsher, more pointed. Kimberly had escalated her claims, painting Benjamin as reckless and unfit to care for children. The lead social worker's gaze was critical as she spoke. "Mr. Reed, we'll need a formal investigation into your guardianship. Until then, the children may have to be placed under temporary care." Benjamin's fists clenched at his sides, his voice steady but cold. "That won't happen. You have my full cooperation, but I'm not letting them go." As the social workers left, Janet's fear returned, tugging at the edges of her fragile hope. She looked at Benjamin, her voice trembling. "What if they take us?" "They won't," Benjamin said firmly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I'll fight this. You're staying here, both of you." After then, Kimberly arrived unannounced, her heels echoing like gunfire against the marble floor. Benjamin met her in the foyer, his stance rigid and unyielding. "Where are they?" Kimberly demanded, her voice cutting. "The social workers told me they're still here. After everything, you're still clinging to this ridiculous—" "Stop," Benjamin said, his voice dangerously low. "You've done enough damage." "Damage?" Kimberly laughed bitterly. "I'm trying to protect you from yourself, from making another mistake." "This isn't about me," Benjamin shot back. "This is about two kids who need help, something you clearly don't care about." "Oh, don't you dare turn this on me," Kimberly snapped, stepping closer. "You're the one who failed Lucas, and now you're setting yourself up to fail them too." Benjamin flinched, her words striking deep, but his resolve didn't waver. "The only failure here is you, Kimberly, and I won't let you destroy what's left of my family." Kimberly opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of the doorbell silenced her. Benjamin turned toward the entrance, his jaw tightening. Kimberly, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line, raised a skeptical brow. "Expecting someone," she drawled, her tone laced with disdain. Ignoring her, Benjamin motioned for the butler to answer. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a poised older woman standing on the threshold. She was elegant in a way that demanded attention, her tailored coat pristine, her silver hair pinned neatly back. Her sharp eyes surveyed the scene inside with calm authority. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, stepping forward with an air of purpose. Benjamin nodded, his brow furrowed. "I'm Benjamin Reed. And you are?" "Karen Wood," she said, extending a hand. "We need to talk." Benjamin hesitated, his gaze flicking to Kimberly, whose face had paled ever so slightly. The name seemed to strike a chord with her. "About what exactly?" Benjamin asked cautiously, stepping aside to let Karen enter. Karen's eyes softened as they landed on Janet, who had emerged from the sitting room, clutching Ryan tightly. The sight of the baby seemed to draw Karen's breath short, though she quickly composed herself. "This is about the baby," Karen said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "About Ryan, or rather Peter, as he was named at birth. He's my grandson." The room fell silent. Janet froze, her grip on Ryan tightening instinctively. Benjamin's expression darkened, his protective instincts flaring. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Karen turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "My daughter, Rachel, is Peter's mother. She gave birth to him 4 months ago, but Rachel, she's been struggling with severe postpartum depression. One night, in a moment of despair, she left Peter where she thought he'd be found. She didn't tell anyone until it was too late." Janet's lips parted in shock, her heart pounding. "You're saying you're his family?" Karen nodded, stepping closer to Janet. Her tone softened. "Yes, and I've been searching for him ever since I learned what happened. It wasn't easy, but eventually I was led here. The people at the homeless shelter told me that a girl had taken my nephew to see Benjamin Reed." She paused, her eyes scanning Janet's face. "I also learned about you, Janet. You've been taking care of him, haven't you?" Janet swallowed hard. "I found him," she admitted, her voice trembling. "In a dumpster. I didn't know. I just couldn't leave him." Karen's eyes glistened, but she didn't let her composure falter. "You saved him," she said simply. After a long moment, Karen turned to Benjamin. "I'm here because I want to take Peter home. But I also want to help Janet. She's been a guardian to my grandson, and I owe her more than I can ever repay. If she's willing, I'd like her to come with us. She deserves a secure, loving home, just as Peter does." Benjamin's jaw tightened, his emotions swirling beneath the surface. "And what makes you think I'll agree to that?" Karen's gaze was steady. "Because you care about them. That much is clear. But I can offer them stability, resources, and a family. I know this is difficult, Mr. Reed, and I respect what you've done for them. But they need more than just kindness." As if sensing the weight of the decision, Karen added, I'm also prepared to show my gratitude in other ways. I've followed your work, Mr. Reed, and I know you've been expanding into new ventures. My family owns several properties that might interest you." Benjamin's expression shifted, but not in the way Karen might have expected. His voice was quiet, but firm. "I didn't take them in expecting a reward, Mrs. Wood." Karen inclined her head. "I understand that. This offer isn't to diminish what you've done. It's to honor it." The room seemed to hold its breath as Benjamin considered her words. His eyes flicked to Janet, who stood silently, her arms protectively cradling Ryan. The thought of losing them, of the sudden emptiness their absence would bring, was unbearable. Yet he couldn't deny the truth in Karen's proposal. "They deserve the best," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "And if that's with you, then I won't stand in the way. But I need your word, Mrs. Wood, that they'll be treated as family. Janet isn't just some girl who happened to find Ryan. She's his sister in every way that matters." Karen nodded solemnly. "You have my word." Benjamin exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. He turned to Janet, his heart heavy. "This is your choice too," he said softly. "If you want to stay here, I'll fight for you. But if you want to go with Karen, I'll make sure you're safe and cared for." Janet's throat tightened, tears brimming in her eyes. She looked at Ryan, then at Karen, and finally back at Benjamin. I just want Ryan to be okay," she said. "Whatever's best for him." Benjamin placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "And what's best for you?" Janet hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know." As the conversation hung in the air, Kimberly, who had been eerily silent, finally exploded. "This is absurd," she shouted, stepping forward. "You're all acting like this is normal. Strangers coming in, children thrown around like pieces on a chessboard. Benjamin, you're going to ruin everything. Again." Her voice cracked with rage. "You couldn't save Lucas, and now you think you can fix it with them. You're only going to hurt them too." "Enough!" Benjamin's voice thundered, silencing her outburst. His eyes blazed with anger and something deeper, an unyielding resolve. Before anyone could respond, the faint cry of Ryan broke through the tension, a soft but powerful reminder of what truly mattered. The distant cry of Ryan broke the thick tension in the room like a crack in a dam. Janet instinctively turned toward the sound, her protective instincts flaring. Karen moved as well, her face softening at the faint reminder of the baby at the heart of all this turmoil. Benjamin stood motionless, his eyes locked on Kimberly, whose face was twisted with a mixture of frustration and something resembling regret. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though she might soften, but the bitterness in her voice shattered the illusion. "You think this is noble, don't you?" Kimberly hissed, playing the hero. "You're deluding yourself, Benjamin. These kids aren't your redemption." "This isn't about redemption," Benjamin replied, his voice calm but cutting. "It's about doing the right thing, something you've clearly forgotten how to do." Kimberly flinched, and for the first time, her confident veneer cracked. She glanced at Karen, whose composed presence seemed to magnify her own pettiness. The realization hit her like a blow. Aligning herself with Karen could have offered her the validation and connections she'd always craved. Instead, her anger and manipulation had isolated her. Her voice faltered as she muttered, "You're going to regret this." Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the mansion. The sharp clack of her heels against the marble echoed long after she'd gone. The Wood estate was nothing like Janet had imagined. Nestled in a quiet suburb, it was elegant yet inviting, its large windows flooding the interior with natural light. The staff greeted her with warm smiles, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and freshly baked bread. Janet hesitated at the threshold, clutching Ryan tightly as Karen guided her inside. "This is your home now," Karen said gently, her hand resting lightly on Janet's shoulder. "Home," Janet echoed, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. For the first time in her life, Janet had a warm bed, clean clothes, and meals that didn't come from a trash bin or handouts. But the adjustment wasn't without its challenges. She often found herself lingering in the shadows, unsure if she truly belonged in a place so full of light. Karen, however, was patient. She encouraged Janet to explore the house, introducing her to the staff and showing her how to care for Ryan with the resources now at their disposal. Slowly, Janet began to trust the older woman. One afternoon, Karen found Janet sitting in the garden, watching Ryan gurgle happily on a blanket. "You've done an incredible job with him," Karen said, sitting beside her. Janet shrugged, her gaze fixed on Ryan. I didn't want him to feel like I did, like no one cared." Karen reached over, placing a hand on Janet's. "He'll never feel that again. Neither will you." For the first time, Janet allowed herself to believe those words. With proper care, Ryan's health improved rapidly. His cheeks filled out, and his once weak cries became hearty giggles. The staff doted on him, and Karen seemed to light up whenever she held him. One evening, as Janet prepared Ryan for bed, she noticed him reaching for her face, his tiny fingers brushing her cheek. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You're getting strong, little guy," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Karen appeared in the doorway, her expression tender. "He's thriving because of you, Janet." Janet looked up, surprised. "Because of us," she corrected softly. Karen's smile widened. "Yes, because of us." Lingering memories of Benjamin. Despite her growing comfort at the Wood estate, Janet often found her thoughts drifting back to Benjamin. She missed his steady presence, the way he had fought for her and Ryan without hesitation. She missed the way he had made her feel safe. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace with Ryan asleep in her lap, Karen approached with a letter in hand. "It's from Benjamin," Karen said, handing it to her. Janet's heart leapt as she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. "Dear Janet, I hope this letter finds you and Ryan well. I've thought about you both every day since you left. The house is quieter now, and I miss the sound of Ryan's laughter and your quiet strength. But knowing you're safe and cared for brings me peace. You'll always have a place here, Janet. Your family, no matter where you are, take care of each other. And if you ever need me, I'm just a phone call away." With care, Benjamin Janet wiped away a tear, clutching the letter to her chest. Karen sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He meant every word, you know." Janet nodded, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I know." In that moment, she realized she didn't have to choose between her new life and the memories of Benjamin. Both could coexist, shaping the family she had always longed for. And now, Janet allowed herself to believe in a future filled with hope. The Wood estate buzzed with quiet anticipation. Karen, always composed, moved with a purpose that hinted at something special. Janet sat in the garden, Ryan in her lap, as sunlight filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree above. She had begun to feel at home here, but the letter from Benjamin lingered in her thoughts. A knock at the front door broke the serene morning. The butler, ever formal, answered and announced, "Mr. Reed is here." Janet's heart pounded with excitement. She scooped Ryan up, her steps quickening as she moved through the halls. By the time she reached the foyer, Benjamin was stepping inside, a small bag in his hand and a warm, tentative smile on his face. "Benjamin!" Janet's voice wavered, a mix of excitement and disbelief. Ryan squirmed in her arms, his face lighting up at the familiar figure. Benjamin's smile widened as he knelt, opening his arms. "There's my boy," he said softly. Ryan reached for him, and Janet handed the baby over. Watching Benjamin hold Ryan again filled her with a warmth she hadn't realized she'd missed. "You look good," Benjamin said, his eyes scanning her face. Both of you do. Janet smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. So do you. Karen appeared at the edge of the room, her gaze sharp but kind. She observed quietly as Benjamin set Ryan down on the floor, pulling a small stuffed bear from his bag. The baby grabbed it with a delighted squeal, and Benjamin's laughter filled the room. Karen stepped forward, her voice light. It seems Ryan remembers you quite well. Benjamin stood, his expression softening. I hoped he would. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for taking such good care of them. Karen nodded, her posture relaxed, but her tone firm. You gave them a foundation of safety and love. That's not something easily forgotten. Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Karen could see the genuine affection Benjamin had for both Janet and Ryan, and she realized his place in their lives was undeniable. You're always welcome here, she said simply. The rest of the day was filled with moments that felt natural, as if no time had passed since they had last been together. Benjamin joined Janet and Ryan in the garden, where Ryan crawled eagerly after the stuffed bear Benjamin had brought. Janet watched them with a mix of joy and longing. It felt right, seeing Benjamin there, laughing with Ryan and teasing her gently about how much taller she seemed. As the afternoon stretched into evening, they gathered in the cozy living room. Karen poured tea, while Benjamin told Janet stories about his latest ventures, peppering in moments of humor that made her laugh in ways she hadn't in weeks. Do you think we'll ever visit your house again? Janet asked suddenly, her tone curious rather than wistful. Benjamin looked at her, his expression warm. Of course. But this is your home now, Janet. I'll come to you. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she nodded. Thank you. For everything. You don't have to thank me, Benjamin said softly. You're family. That's what family does. When the evening came to a close, Janet found herself reluctant to see Benjamin go. She carried Ryan to the front door, where Benjamin stood with his coat slung over one arm. Will you visit again soon? Janet asked, her voice quiet. As often as you'll have me, Benjamin promised, his eyes sincere. Ryan babbled in her arms, reaching toward Benjamin as if to say goodbye. He pressed a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead, then turned to Janet. Take care of yourself, he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. And remember, I'm just a phone call away. She nodded, her throat tight. We will. As Benjamin stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against his face, he turned back one last time. The sight of Janet and Ryan framed in the doorway, with Karen standing just behind them, filled him with a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Later that night, Janet sat by the window, Ryan asleep in her arms. She looked out into the quiet night, her heart full. Family, she murmured, the word feeling more real than it ever had before. Karen joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He'll be back soon, Karen said softly. Janet smiled, glancing down at Ryan, then up at the stars. For the first time, she felt like her place in the world was secure. No longer alone, she had a family that spanned homes, love that stretched across distances, and a future that finally seemed bright. The morning sun bathed the small cemetery in a soft, golden glow. Benjamin stood silently before Lucas's grave, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. The simple headstone bore his son's name, a stark reminder of the life he had lost. For a long moment, he said nothing, allowing the stillness to wrap around him. Then, his voice broke through the quiet, low and steady. Hey, buddy, he began, a faint tremor in his tone. It's been a while since I came to see you. He knelt, brushing away a stray leaf that had settled against the stone. His fingers lingered there, tracing the letters etched into the granite. I've been thinking about you a lot, he continued. I used to believe I'd failed you, that if I'd just been a better father, you'd still be here. His voice caught, and he paused to collect himself. "But lately I've realized something," he said, his tone firmer now. "I can't change the past, Lucas. I can only move forward, and I think you'd want me to." A faint smile touched his lips as he straightened. "You would have loved Janet and Peter. They remind me of you in so many ways. Strong, brave, and so full of life." Benjamin exhaled slowly, the cool air stinging his lungs. "I'll never stop missing you, son. But I promise I'm going to keep living, for them and for myself, and I'll carry you with me every step of the way." He rose, a sense of peace settling over him as he turned to leave. The wood estate had become a sanctuary of warmth and love, its halls filled with laughter and the soft hum of life. Janet, now more confident and radiant than ever, had fully embraced her place in the family. Ryan's giggles echoed through the garden as he toddled after Benjamin, who crouched with open arms, encouraging the baby's wobbly steps. "Come on, little man," Benjamin called, his grin wide. "You've got this." Janet watched from the porch, her heart swelling at the sight. Karen sat beside her, sipping tea and observing the scene with a contented smile. "He's really good with them," Janet said softly, her gaze never leaving Benjamin and Ryan. Karen nodded. "He is. And so are you. You've come a long way, Janet." Janet blushed, ducking her head. "I still have a lot to learn." "We all do," Karen replied. "But you've built something beautiful here, a family." The word hung in the air, warm and full of meaning. Janet glanced at Karen, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for everything. I wouldn't have this without you." Karen reached over, squeezing Janet's hand. "You deserve it, dear. Never doubt that." As the sun began to set, casting the garden in a golden haze, Janet joined Benjamin and Ryan on the lawn. Ryan clutched her hand, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers with trust and affection. Benjamin looked up, his expression softening. "There's our star player," he teased, holding out the stuffed bear Ryan loved. Janet laughed, the sound light and carefree. "Don't let him hear that. He'll get a big head." Benjamin chuckled, scooping Ryan into his arms. The baby squealed with delight, his laughter ringing out as Benjamin spun him around. Janet stood back, watching them with a mixture of joy and gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt truly anchored, part of something bigger than herself. Karen appeared at the edge of the garden, waving them in for dinner. The aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread wafted through the open doors, inviting them inside. As they walked back toward the house, Benjamin rested a hand on Janet's shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her smile radiant. "More than okay." And she meant it. For Janet, the girl who had once called a tattered tent her home, life had changed in ways she never thought possible. Here, surrounded by love and laughter, she had found her forever family. As the door closed behind them, sealing the warmth of the house inside, Janet glanced out at the stars. "Thank you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe itself. For the first time, she truly believed she was exactly where she was meant to be. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.